Sarah Ferguson might be about to do something absolutely unthinkable. After decades of standing by Prince Andrew through every scandal, every headline, every humiliation, insiders are now saying she's ready to turn on him completely. We're talking about a woman who defended him when almost no one else would, who lived under the same roof even after their divorce, who smiled for the cameras while the rest of the royal family shut them out. But something has changed. Sources close to the palace say she's furious, she feels betrayed, and most importantly, she's been keeping records, emails, messages, communications that could expose not just Andrew, but the people who protected him for years. This isn't just another royal drama. This could be the moment Sarah Ferguson finally tells her side of the story, and it might bring down more than just one disgraced prince. Let's go back to where this all started, because Sarah Ferguson and Prince Andrew were never your typical royals. When they divorced in 1996, most people expected them to do what divorced couples do: split up, move on, maybe see each other at family events. But that's not what happened. They kept living together at Royal Lodge, this massive property in Windsor that became their shared home for years. At first, people thought it was sweet. The tabloids called them the exes who never truly split, and painted this picture of a modern, unconventional relationship. They were the royals who laughed louder, cared less about stuffy traditions, and seemed genuinely happy even after their marriage ended. For a while, that image really worked for them, while other members of the royal family moved with careful precision and kept their distance from scandal. Sarah and Andrew looked human. They looked flawed and relatable in a way the monarchy rarely allows. People actually liked them for it. They were supposed to be the safe ones, the royals you could root for without feeling weird about it. But here's what nobody talked about at the time. That arrangement wasn't just about love or friendship. It was about survival. Sarah had serious financial problems. She'd been in debt for years, made bad business decisions, and desperately needed stability. Andrew, on the other hand, needed loyalty. He needed someone in his corner who wouldn't abandon him when things got messy. And trust me, things were about to get very, very messy. So, they had this unspoken deal. We protect each other no matter what. We keep each other relevant in a world that's already decided we don't belong. And for a long time, it worked. The garden parties, the polite interviews, the family photos, all of it was built on that quiet pact. But that kind of arrangement only lasts until one person decides the cost is too high. And according to people who know them, Sarah Ferguson has reached that breaking point. Everything changed when Jeffrey Epstein came into their lives. This was the late 1990s and early 2000s, and Epstein was everywhere among the wealthy elite. He had connections to politicians, celebrities, royalty, you name it. To Prince Andrew, Epstein was a gateway to staying relevant in those circles. Andrew had already been pushed to the sidelines by the royal family, so having a friend with that kind of access mattered to him. For Sarah, though, Epstein was something else entirely. He was a lifeline. She was drowning in debt, reportedly millions of pounds in the red, and Epstein stepped in with what seemed like generosity. He helped pay off some of her debts, allegedly gave her financial advice, and made himself indispensable to her survival. Sarah later called him a steadfast and generous friend in leaked emails, and that phrase would come back to haunt her in the worst way. Here's the thing. At the time, they either didn't know or didn't care about the darker side of Jeffrey Epstein's world. Maybe they were willfully ignorant. Maybe they genuinely had no idea. But by the time his crimes started surfacing publicly, their connection to him was already way too deep. Private jets, parties, meetings, it all pointed back to them. Every photograph, every email, every favor suddenly became evidence of complicity in the public eye. When Epstein was arrested in 2019, everything exploded. Virginia Giuffre came forward with allegations against Prince Andrew, claiming she was trafficked to him when she was just 17 years old. Andrew denied everything, called the allegations baseless, even did that disastrous BBC interview where he claimed he couldn't sweat and was at Pizza Express in Woking on the night in question. The whole thing was a public relations nightmare. Charities started cutting ties with him immediately. The palace stripped him of his royal duties and his military titles. The monarchy itself was shaking. But Sarah's role in all of this, that's where it gets complicated. Those leaked emails showing she'd called Epstein a friend were damning enough, but there was more. Reports suggested Epstein had been financing parts of her lifestyle for over a decade. When that truth broke, there was no way to spin it. Sarah tried to distance herself, claimed she'd been manipulated, even said Epstein had threatened her at some point. But the damage was done. The public didn't care about the nuances. They saw two royals who'd gotten too close to a monster, and no explanation was going to fix that. And then, Epstein died in that jail cell in August 2019, and suddenly there were no more answers. Just accusations, denials, and a growing mountain of suspicion that wouldn't go away. For Andrew, it meant the end of his public life. For Sarah, it meant watching everything she'd rebuilt after her divorce crumble all over again. But this time, she reportedly started blaming Andrew for dragging her into it in the first place. Behind the walls of Royal Lodge, something fundamental started to break. The couple who'd managed to stay friendly through a divorce, who'd made that unconventional living arrangement work for decades, suddenly couldn't stand each other. Sources close to the family say the atmosphere inside that house has become unbearable. We're talking shouting matches, slammed doors, days of complete silence where they avoid each other entirely. Sarah reportedly feels like Andrew threw her under the bus. In her view, he was the one who brought Epstein into their lives. He was the one who made those connections, who insisted on maintaining that friendship even when warning signs were already there. And every consequence since, every scandal, every headline, she sees as a direct result of his choices. She's been humiliated publicly, stripped of patronages, pushed out of royal circles, and in her mind, it's all because of him. Andrew, of course, sees it completely differently. Friends of his say he believes Sarah was always living beyond her means, always making financial mistakes, and that she chose to accept Epstein's help just as much as he did. He thinks dragging his name through the mud now won't save her reputation, it'll just destroy what little dignity they both have left. Their daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, are stuck in the middle of all this. They're still technically part of the royal family, still get invited to events, but everyone knows they're walking on eggshells. One wrong headline, one embarrassing story about their parents, and their position could change overnight. Reports say they're heartbroken and exhausted by the whole situation. They love their parents, but they're also tired of defending them. What used to be a united front has completely splintered, and here's what makes this so dangerous for Andrew. Sarah isn't planning to fade quietly into the background. People who know her say she's been keeping records, old emails, text messages, communications that could paint a very different picture of what really happened, the kind of proof that could blow the roof off the royal facade if it ever got released. Right now, those records are leverage. Sarah knows that as long as she has them, she has power. But if she feels cornered enough, if she believes her only option is to protect herself at all costs, she might actually use them. And that's what has the palace so nervous. So, what exactly is Sarah Ferguson holding on to? That's the question everyone's asking, and honestly, nobody outside her inner circle knows for sure. But based on what's been reported, we can piece together some possibilities. First, there are the financial records. Sarah accepted money and help from Jeffrey Epstein for years, but the full extent of that relationship has never been made public. If she has documentation showing exactly how much money changed hands, who facilitated those transactions, and whether other members of the royal family knew about it, that's explosive. It would prove that the palace's claim of ignorance was either a lie or willful negligence. Then there are the communications. Sarah allegedly has emails and messages between herself, Andrew, and potentially other figures in Epstein's circle. These could reveal what they knew and when they knew it. Did they ignore warning signs? Were they warned by others and chose to continue the friendship anyway? That kind of evidence would be devastating, not just for Andrew, but for anyone else named in those exchanges. There's also the question of what happened behind the scenes after the scandal broke. How did the royal family respond privately? Were there conversations about covering things up, managing the narrative, or sacrificing Andrew to protect the crown? If Sarah was part of those discussions or overheard things she wasn't supposed to, that's another layer of potential exposure. And finally, there's whatever she knows about Andrew's direct involvement with Epstein. Sarah lived with him, traveled with him, was part of his social circle during the years when these alleged crimes were happening. She might not have been in the room for everything, but she was close enough to see patterns, to hear conversations, to notice things that didn't add up. If she decides to share those observations publicly, it would be nearly impossible for Andrew to deny. The palace is reportedly terrified of all this, not just because it would be bad for Andrew, although obviously it would be, but because it could implicate other people. It could raise questions about how much the institution knew and chose to ignore. It could make the entire royal family look complicit in protecting a man accused of horrific crimes. And that's a PR disaster they might not recover from. For now, Sarah hasn't made any public moves. No tell-all book, no interview, no leaked documents. But insiders say she's been meeting with lawyers, discussing her options, and making it clear that she's done being the scapegoat. If the palace tries to push her out completely, if they try to strip away what little she has left, she's ready to fight back. And her weapon isn't just her voice, it's everything she's been quietly collecting for years. While all of this has been unfolding, the royal family has been trying to distance themselves as much as possible. King Charles, who's now running the show, has made it pretty clear that Andrew is no longer welcome in any official capacity. He's been stripped of his military titles, his royal patronages, and his HRH status in any public setting. Essentially, he's been exiled from royal life without actually being exiled. Sarah's situation is even more complicated because she was never fully part of the royal family after the divorce. She wasn't technically a working royal, didn't have official duties, and was mostly tolerated rather than embraced. But now, even that tolerance has evaporated. Charities that once worked with her have quietly distanced themselves. Public events where she used to be welcome no longer send invitations. She's been frozen out in a way that's polite but unmistakable. The problem for the palace is that Sarah and Andrew are still living at Royal Lodge, this massive property that technically belongs to the crown. There have been rumors for months that King Charles wants them out. He reportedly wants to downsize their living situation, maybe move them to Frogmore Cottage, the same place Harry and Meghan used to live, but Andrew has been resisting, partly out of stubbornness and partly because leaving Royal Lodge would feel like admitting defeat. If they do get evicted, that's when things could really escalate. Sarah might decide that if the royal family is going to throw her out anyway, she has nothing left to lose by speaking up. And that's the scenario that keeps palace advisors up at night. There's also the issue of Beatrice and Eugenie. They're still technically part of the family, still show up to royal events, but their position is increasingly uncomfortable. They're tied to parents who are seen as liabilities, and every time there's a new headline about Andrew or Sarah, it reflects on them too. The palace wants to protect them, but it's hard to do that without completely cutting ties with their parents, which would be a PR nightmare of its own. So, the royal family is stuck. They can't fully embrace Andrew and Sarah without looking complicit. They can't completely cast them out without looking cruel and inviting more scrutiny. And they definitely can't control what Sarah might say if she decides her silence isn't worth it anymore. It's a lose-lose situation, and the longer it drags on, the worse it gets for everyone involved. So why is all of this coming to a head right now? Why, after years of keeping quiet and playing nice, is Sarah Ferguson reportedly ready to break ranks? Part of it is practical. She's running out of options. Her finances are still a mess, her public image is ruined, and the royal family has made it clear they're done helping her. If she's going to rebuild her life, she needs to do it on her own terms. And that might mean telling her story before someone else does it for her. But there's also an emotional component. Sarah has spent decades protecting Andrew, defending him, standing by him when almost nobody else would. And what did it get her? She's been humiliated just as much as he has, maybe even more. Because at least Andrew had the protection of being born into royalty. Sarah was always an outsider, always disposable, and now she's feeling the full weight of that reality. There's also the fact that public opinion has shifted. A few years ago, speaking out against the royal family was seen as betrayal, something that would make you look bitter and vengeful. But after Harry and Meghan's interview with Oprah, after all the revelations about how the institution operates, people are more willing to listen to criticism. There's an appetite for these kinds of stories now, and Sarah knows it. And then there's the legal side. Virginia Giuffre's lawsuit against Prince Andrew was settled out of court in 2022, reportedly for millions of pounds. That settlement didn't include an admission of guilt, but it also didn't clear Andrew's name. The cloud of suspicion is still there, and it's never going away. For Sarah, that means her association with him will always be a stain on her reputation unless she finds a way to separate herself from his actions. Speaking out might be the only way to do that. Finally, there's the matter of legacy. Sarah is 65 years old now. She's not going to be around forever, and neither is Andrew. If she doesn't tell her side of the story soon, the narrative will be set in stone without her input. She'll be remembered as the woman who enabled a disgraced prince, who took money from a predator, who smiled and stayed silent while terrible things happened. That's not the legacy she wants, and she might be willing to burn a lot of bridges to change it. So, where does this leave us? What's actually going to happen? Honestly, nobody knows for sure. Sarah hasn't made any definitive moves yet, and it's possible she never will. She might decide that the cost of speaking out is too high, that the backlash wouldn't be worth it, and that staying quiet is still her best option. But the fact that people close to the palace are even worried about this possibility tells you something. They believe she's capable of it, and that's significant. If Sarah does decide to go public, there are a few ways it could happen. She could write a book, something she's done before, but this time it would be much more explosive. A tell-all memoir that names, shares receipts, and lays out exactly what happened behind the scenes. Publishers would pay a fortune for that kind of access, and it would be an instant bestseller. She could also do an interview, maybe with someone like Oprah or a major news program. That would give her a platform to tell her story in her own words, to push back against the narrative that's been building for years, and to humanize herself in a way that written statements never could. The risk, of course, is that it could backfire spectacularly if she comes across as defensive or dishonest, or she could do something more subtle. Leak documents to journalists, cooperate with an investigative reporter who's already working on the story, or provide information anonymously that would lead to new revelations. That way, she gets the information out there without directly attaching her name to it, at least not at first. For Andrew, any of these scenarios would be disastrous. His reputation is already destroyed, but Sarah speaking out could make things even worse. It could lead to new legal scrutiny, more public outrage, and potentially even criminal investigations if she reveals something that authorities didn't know about. He's already lost almost everything, but this could be the final blow. For the royal family, this is about damage control. They've already distanced themselves from Andrew as much as possible, but if Sarah starts talking, it could pull others into the spotlight. It could force uncomfortable questions about who knew what and when, about whether the institution protected Andrew at the expense of his victims, about whether the monarchy itself is fundamentally rotten. Those are existential questions, and the palace does not want to answer them. The story of Sarah Ferguson and Prince Andrew was supposed to be a fairy tale. Even if it was an unconventional one, two people who loved each other, got divorced, but stayed friends and proved that modern royalty could be different. But that's not how it turned out. Instead, it became a cautionary tale about loyalty, survival, and what happens when you tie yourself to someone who drags you down with them. Right now, Sarah is at a crossroads. She can stay silent, protect what little she has left, and hope that time will soften the public's judgment. Or she can speak out, tell her truth, and risk burning every remaining bridge to the life she once knew. It's not an easy choice, and there's no guarantee that either path will lead to redemption. But here's what we know for sure. The palace is nervous. Andrew is scared. And Sarah Ferguson, the woman who was once dismissed as a minor royal with bad finances and worse judgment, suddenly has more power than anyone expected. Because in the ruthless world of royalty, the most dangerous person is the one with nothing left to lose. So, what do you think? Is Sarah Ferguson justified in wanting to speak out, or would it just make things worse for everyone involved? Let me know in the comments, and if you want to stay updated on this story as it develops, make sure you hit that subscribe button. This is far from over, and the next chapter could be the most explosive one yet. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.